There is a moment in every person's life when they feel completely invisible. Not invisible like a superpower. Invisible like nobody sees you. Nobody notices you are there. Nobody cares whether you struggle or not. For millions of veterans across America, that feeling comes more often than it should. These are men and women who gave years of their lives to this country. Some gave their health, some gave pieces of their minds that they never fully got back. And many of them came home to a country that moved on without them. This story is about one of those veterans. His name was James Patterson. He was in his late 70s. He drove a beat-up car. He lived alone in a small apartment in Carmel, California. He had a Purple Heart that sat in a box on his dresser, and he had a government check that came once a month that was never quite enough. On a Tuesday morning in September 2018, James walked into a Safeway grocery store with a small basket and a worn leather wallet. He needed bread. He needed eggs. He needed milk. He needed lunch meat. The simplest things. The kind of grocery run a person does just to survive the next few days. He had no idea that morning would change his life. He had no idea that someone else in that store would see him, really see him. Not as a problem, not as a delay, not as an old man holding up the checkout line, but as a man who deserved dignity. And he had no idea that the person who would give him that dignity was one of the most famous men in Hollywood. Stick with this story all the way through. Because what happened inside that Safeway did not end when everyone walked out the door. What happened that morning kept going. It grew. It touched dozens of lives, and it ended in a way that will stay with you for a very long time. Carmel by the Sea is a small town on the coast of California. It is the kind of place where the streets are lined with boutique shops and art galleries, where the ocean is close enough that you can smell it when you step outside, where people know each other by name and strangers are easy to spot. It is also the place that Clint Eastwood has called home for a very long time. Most people picture Clint Eastwood the way they have seen him in movies, squinting under the brim of a cowboy hat, speaking in a low voice that makes everything sound like a final warning, standing in the middle of a dusty street with one hand hovering near his holster. But that version of Clint Eastwood belongs to the movies. In the real Clint Eastwood is a man who wakes up in the morning, puts on jeans and a button-down shirt, pulls a baseball cap over his head, and goes about his day like anyone else. He picks up his own groceries. He drives himself around. He does not travel with bodyguards or assistants or people whose job is to keep the public away from him. That Tuesday morning in September, Clint had one thing on his mind: coffee. He needed coffee before heading to his office. So he stopped at the Safeway on his usual route, walked in like any other regular customer, grabbed a cup of coffee and a newspaper, and looked for the shortest checkout line he could find. He picked lane 3. There was only one person ahead of him, an elderly man with a small basket. Clint did not think much of it at first. He was just waiting in line like everyone else. He looked at his phone. He looked at the newspaper in his hand. He was not paying close attention to what was happening at the register. But then he started to notice. The cashier at lane 3 was a young woman named Ashley. She was in her early 20s working the morning shift, scanning items with the speed of someone who had done this job long enough for it to feel automatic. She was polite but not warm, professional but not patient. She scanned the elderly man's items one by one: a loaf of bread, a carton of eggs, a gallon of milk, a small package of lunch meat. 4 items. That was everything. 4 basic food items and nothing else. "That'll be $18.73, Ashley said. The elderly man reached into the pocket of his jacket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. He opened it, and even from where Clint was standing behind him, it was clear there were no bills inside, no folded 20s, no 10s, just the coin pocket and the small flat emptiness where paper money should have been. The man's face changed in that moment, just slightly, just enough for someone paying attention to notice. He reached into the coin pocket and began pulling out coins. Quarters, dimes, nickels, pennies. He placed them on the counter carefully, one by one, the way a person does when they are counting out every single cent they have. Clint watched. The man's name was James Patterson, though Clint did not know that yet. James was a Vietnam veteran. He had served from 1968 to 1970. He had come home from that war to a country that was deeply divided, about whether that war had been worth fighting. There were no parades for Vietnam veterans. There were no crowds cheering at the airport. And many of them came home quietly, slipped back into their lives as best they could, and tried to forget things that could not be forgotten. James had spent decades trying to rebuild a normal life. He had worked jobs. He had raised a family. He had done his best. But the years had been hard, and the body that had survived Vietnam had collected its own kind of damage over time. By 2018, James was living on a fixed income from the VA disability benefits, a check that came once a month and had to stretch across every bill, every grocery run, every unexpected expense. Most months it was enough. Most months James managed. But some months the timing was off. A bill would hit at the wrong moment. The check would not land until a few days later, and there would be a gap. A few days where James would look at his wallet and know that what was inside it was all he had until the money came through. This was one of those days. James counted his coins. $1, $2, $5. He was going slowly. His hands were steady at first, the hands of a man who had learned to move with care and precision. But as the pile of coins grew and the total crept upward, his hands started to shake slightly. Not from illness, from tension, from the quiet, burning embarrassment of knowing that the line was backing up, that the cashier was waiting, that the people behind him could see exactly what was happening. $10, $12. He reached the end of his coins. $16.26, he said quietly. He looked up at Ashley. His face was a careful mask, but behind it there was something raw, something that had nothing to do with the money and everything to do with what it felt like to be standing there. "I'm sorry," he said. "I thought I had more." Ashley looked at the screen, then at him. "Sir, you're $2.47 short. You'll need to put something back." $2.47. That is less than the price of a cup of coffee at most gas stations. It is what falls out of couch cushions. It is what you find in the cup holder of your car after a few weeks. It is nothing. But in that moment, for James Patterson, it was everything. He looked down at his groceries: bread, eggs, milk, lunch meat. He had not bought snacks. He had not bought anything extra. He had not picked up soda or chips or cookies. This basket held exactly what a person needs to survive for a few days, nothing more. And now he had to decide which one to put back. The lunch meat," he said quietly. "I'll put that back." Ashley reached for it to void the item, but James stopped her. "Wait, how much is the milk?" $3.49, Ashley said. James stood there doing the math in his head. If he put back the milk instead of the lunch meat, he would save more money, but then he would not have enough for something else. He was trying to find the combination of 4 basic food items that he could actually afford with $16.26. People in line behind Clint were starting to shift their weight. Someone muttered something that was not loud enough to make out, but was loud enough for everyone to feel. Clint noticed all of this. He noticed the worn Army veteran baseball cap on James's head. He noticed the jacket that had been washed so many times the color had faded. He noticed the careful, not deliberate way James had placed his coins on the counter, not carelessly, not with frustration, but with the focused attention of someone who was giving every cent he had. This was not someone being irresponsible. This was not someone who had wasted their money and was now complaining about the consequences. This was a man who had served his country, who was living on a fixed income that did not quite cover everything, who had walked into a grocery store to buy the most basic food a person can eat and come up $2.47 short. Clint had grown up watching his mother stretch money during the Great Depression. He had seen what real financial hardship looked like. He knew the difference between someone making a bad choice and someone caught in a hard situation. This was a hard situation. "I'll just take the bread and eggs," James said finally. When his voice was quiet but firm, he had made his decision. He would leave without milk. He would leave without the lunch meat. He would take bread and eggs because he could afford bread and eggs, and he would figure out the rest later. Ashley began to void the items from the transaction, and then Clint stepped forward. He did not make a big announcement. He did not tap James on the shoulder with a dramatic gesture. He simply moved forward in line and placed his coffee and his newspaper on the belt behind James's items. Then he spoke to Ashley. "Ring it all up together." His items and mine. Ashley stopped. James turned around. He looked at the man behind him, this tall figure in jeans and a baseball cap, and confusion crossed his face. "I'm sorry?" "Ring up all of it," Clint said again, calm and clear. "Everything he has, and I plus my coffee and paper. One transaction." Ashley hesitated. James looked from Clint back to the register and back to Clint again. "Sir, I can't let you do that," James said. "You're not letting me do anything," Clint said. His voice was not loud. It was not commanding. It was the voice of a man who had made a decision and was not interested in arguing about it. "I'm buying coffee. You're buying groceries. The cashier is ringing it up. That's all that's happening here." "But I can't pay you back," James said. There was a crack in his voice now, just a small one, but Clint heard it. "I don't have any way to—" "I'm not asking you to pay me back," Clint said, cutting him off gently. "Your groceries are in front of my coffee, so they're going through together." That's how checkout lines work. There is something important to understand about what Clint did in that moment. He did not make it charity. He did not stand there with a hand on his heart saying, "Please, let me help you. It would mean so much to me." He did not turn it into a moment where James had to feel grateful in order for the gesture to work. He just made it normal. He made it matter of fact. He turned it into something that was simply happening, the same way coffee happening in front of you in the morning is simply happening. There was no debt in the way he framed it. There was no power imbalance. There was no moment where James had to bow his head and thank his benefactor. There was just a man buying groceries and another man buying coffee, and everything going through in one transaction. It was the smartest and the kindest part of the whole thing. Ashley scanned the milk back into the transaction. She scanned the lunch meat back in. She added Clint's coffee and newspaper. The total came to $22.57. Clint handed her his card without looking at the screen. While the transaction processed, he turned to James. "What branch?" James answered before he even had time to think about it. When a fellow serviceman or a person who respects the military asks what branch, the answer comes out automatically. It is trained into you. "Army, Vietnam, 68 to 70. Clint nodded. "Thank you for your service." 3 words, simple words. Words that sometimes get said so often they lose their meaning. But in that moment, spoken quietly between 2 men standing at a grocery store checkout, they meant something. James looked at this stranger who had just paid for his groceries and was now thanking him for a war he fought 50 years ago, and something in his face shifted. Ashley handed Clint his receipt. She handed a separate receipt to James. His groceries, paid for, everything he had come in for, ready to go. James took the receipt and looked at it for a moment. Then he looked up at the man who had paid. He really looked at him. Not the way you glance at the person behind you in line. He looked at him the way you look at someone when you are trying to figure out something important. The baseball cap, the calm eyes, the height, the jaw, the quiet, unshakable way this man had of standing like he had been through enough things in his life that grocery store checkout lines did not rattle him. And then James knew. "Are you?" James started. "Hunter," he stopped. He started again. "You're Clint Eastwood." Clint gave the smallest nod. "Just picking up coffee." James stood perfectly still for a moment. If you have ever had a moment where 2 completely separate parts of your life suddenly collided in a way you never expected, you know what James was feeling. He had come in to buy groceries. He had run short. He had felt that terrible sinking feeling of public embarrassment. He had been standing at the register trying to calculate how many meals he could get out of $16.26. And the person who had stepped up to help him was Clint Eastwood. James's eyes filled with tears. He did not try to hide it. He was in his late 70s. He was a combat veteran. He had lived through things most people will never experience. And still, standing there in lane 3 of a Safeway grocery store, holding a receipt for bread and eggs and milk and lunch meat, he could not stop his eyes from filling up. "I can't believe," he started, and then he stopped because his voice was not working the way he needed it to. He tried again. "Thank you," he said. "Not just for this." He gestured at the groceries, but he meant more than the groceries. He meant everything. He meant all of it. "Your movies got me through some hard times," James said. "After I got back from Vietnam, things were rough. People weren't. It wasn't easy to come home. A lot of us were struggling, and nobody wanted to talk about it. But I would watch your westerns. I would watch Dirty Harry. And something about those characters helped me. They were tough, but they had a code. They went through terrible things and they came out the other side with their principles still intact. That meant something to me. That gave me something to hold on to. Clint listened. He did not interrupt. He did not wave it off with modesty or redirect the conversation. He just listened, the way you listen when someone is telling you something real. And then he said something that James would remember for the rest of his life. "You went through real hell," Clint said. "I just played characters who went through fictional versions. What you did matters a lot more than anything I've ever done on a screen." James shook his head. "No, sir. You gave people like me something to hold on to. That matters." The checkout lane had gone quiet. Ashley had stopped doing anything else. The customers behind Clint had stopped checking their phones. So people in the neighboring checkout lanes had drifted closer without quite realizing they were doing it. Nobody was in a hurry anymore. There is something that happens when genuine human kindness breaks out in a public place. It stops people. Not because something dramatic or unusual is happening, but because something real is happening. And most people deep down are so hungry for something real that when they see it, they cannot look away. The Safeway in Carmel was a busy store on a Tuesday morning. People had places to be, work to get to, kids to drop off, lives to manage. And yet in the space around Lane 3, time had slowed down. Some people had recognized Clint. A few had their phones out, not to be intrusive, but because they were witnessing something and they did not want to forget it. But nobody was being loud about it. Nobody was calling out his name or pushing forward for a photo. They were just watching. James was still talking. The words were coming out of him now, the way words sometimes come out when you have been holding them in for too long and something finally breaks the seal. "I live on a fixed income," he said. His voice was steadier now, but the emotion was still there underneath every word. "Disability from the VA. It is enough most days. But sometimes the timing of when bills hit and when the check comes. Today was one of those days. I needed food, but the money wasn't quite there yet." He looked down for a moment. "I was standing here counting coins and feeling like..." He stopped. "Feeling like I had failed somehow. Like I should have planned better. Like I should have figured it out. And I know that's not... I know the money is coming. I know it's just a few days. But standing here in front of everyone, coming up short on $18 worth of groceries..." He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Every person in that store who was listening understood exactly what he meant. The feeling he was describing was not really about money. It was about invisibility. It was about the quiet humiliation of needing help in a public place and not being sure anyone around you sees you as worth helping. "You didn't fail anything," Clint said. His voice was firm, not the fictional firmness of a movie character, the real firmness of a man who meant what he was saying. "You served your country. You are dealing with a system that does not always take care of its veterans the way it should. That is not failure. Yeah, that is just reality being harder than it ought to be." An older woman who had been waiting in line behind Clint stepped forward. She was maybe 65, with silver hair and a reusable grocery bag over her arm. She opened her purse, pulled out a $20 bill, and held it out to James. "For later," she said simply. "For when the timing is off again." James looked at the bill and then at her. "No, I couldn't." She closed his hand around it. Her grip was gentle but final. "My father was in World War II, she said. "Someone helped him once when he needed it. This is me paying that forward." What happened in the next 2 minutes was the kind of thing that people who were there would talk about for years. It started with the woman and her $20 bill. And then, one by one, the people standing around that checkout lane began to move. And a man in a business suit, probably on his way to work, walked up and held out $50. He did not say much. He just handed it over and stepped back. A young mother with 2 kids at her side dug through her purse and came up with a $20 bill. Her kids watched with wide eyes as she handed it to the old man with the veteran's cap. The bagger at the end of Lane 3, a teenager who was making not much more than minimum wage, reached into the pocket of his work apron and pulled out a folded $10 bill. He had been watching everything that happened from 3 feet away. He walked up and held out his $10 without a word. A man who had been in the express lane next to them walked over with a $20 bill. A woman from the bakery section who had been passing by stopped and added another $20. Within 2 minutes, James Patterson was standing at the checkout counter with over $200 in cash. He had come in needing $18.73. He was leaving with $200 and all of his groceries paid for. But that was not even the most important part. Ashley, the cashier, who had been professionally neutral at the start of all this, who had told James he needed to put something back, was crying. Not dramatically, not making a scene. Just quietly standing at her register with tears running down her face, watching what was happening in front of her. She reached under the register. She pulled out a Safeway gift card. "This is from employee discretionary funds," she said, though several people suspected she was paying for it herself. "It has $25 on it for next time." James looked around at the people surrounding him. Strangers. Every single one of them was a stranger. He did not know their names. He had never seen their faces before, and they had just given him more help in 2 minutes than he had received from most official channels in years. He could not speak. He just stood there, holding his receipt and his gift card and a fistful of cash, surrounded by strangers who had chosen, in a single moment, to see him, to notice him, to say without words that his life mattered and his struggle was worth paying attention to. Clint picked up his coffee and his newspaper. He was not a man who was comfortable with extended emotional scenes. He had done what he came to do. He had bought his coffee. He had made sure James got his groceries. He had listened when James spoke. Now it was time to let the moment breathe without turning it into something bigger than it already was. Tony started walking toward the exit. James called after him, "Mr. Eastwood." Clint stopped and turned. "I will never forget this," James said. "Never." Clint looked at him for a moment. "Just take care of yourself, James, and thank you again for your service." He walked out the door. The store stayed quiet for another few seconds after he left, and then slowly, gently, like air coming back into a room, after a held breath, people began to move again. They returned to their shopping carts. They checked out their groceries. They headed toward the exit. But something had changed. People were making eye contact with each other. Real eye contact, the kind where you actually see the person looking back at you. People were smiling, not the polite, automatic smile you give a stranger in a grocery store aisle, but the warm, slightly stunned smile of someone who just witnessed something good. Ashley wiped her face with the back of her hand and straightened up. She had a line to get through, but she was smiling too. The bagger at the end of the lane was grinning at nothing in particular. The woman who had given James $20 and mentioned her father squeezed his hand before she left. James stood there for another moment, his groceries in hand, his wallet heavier than it had been in a long time, his heart somehow both heavier and lighter at the same time. Then he walked out to his car, put his groceries in the back seat, and sat in the driver's seat for a few minutes without starting the engine. He needed a moment. Ashley finished her shift that day and told her manager everything that had happened. The manager told the store director. By that afternoon, Safeway's corporate office had heard the story. By that evening, the regional team was in conversation about what to do next. And within days, they had established something at that store that had never existed before. A Veterans Assistance Fund. A small, discreet reserve of money that employees could access when a veteran came to the register and came up short. It would not be a big announcement. There would be no banner over the door. Nobody would call it out loudly in front of other customers. It would just be there, quietly, the way that woman's $20 bill had been quietly there for James. A safety net made of decency. They named it the James Patterson Veterans Assistance Fund. James himself did not find out about this until some weeks later. When he did, he sat down at his kitchen table and stared at the wall for a long time. When he had been feeling invisible for so many years. And now there was a fund with his name on it in a grocery store, set up because a room full of strangers had watched him count coins and decided he deserved better. He started going back to that Safeway every week. At first he went back because it was his regular store, and he had no reason to avoid it. But over time, he went back because something had changed. The employees knew his name now. They waved when they saw him come through the door. Ashley, when she was working, would come find him in the aisles and say hello. Regular customers who had been there that morning would stop him for a few words. The store had, in a real way, adopted him. Not officially, not with paperwork, but in the way that communities actually work, through small, repeated acts of recognition that add up to belonging. James used the $200 that strangers had given him to cover a utility bill that had been sitting on his kitchen counter, worrying him for 2 weeks. He bought an extra week's worth of groceries. He had enough left over to feel, for the first time in a while, like he had a small cushion between himself and the next hard moment. He told his nephew about that day. He told it in detail, the way people tell stories that change something in them. He said that before walking into that Safeway, he had been feeling invisible, forgotten, like the things he had gone through and the years he had given did not register with anyone anymore. And then, he said to his nephew, a store full of strangers reminded me that I mattered. To understand why Clint Eastwood did what he did that morning, you have to understand a little about who he is beyond the movies. Clint grew up during the Great Depression. He watched his mother manage money carefully, stretch it as far as it could go, and treat every dollar as something real and important. He learned early that financial hardship is not a character flaw. It is something that happens to people through circumstances they did not always choose and could not always control. He has spoken publicly over the years about his respect for veterans, and it is not the casual, performative respect that sometimes gets tossed around without any weight behind it. It comes from a generation that understood service as something real, something that cost people things they could not get back. He spent 2 years in the Army himself in the early 1950s. He knows what it means to put on a uniform. He knows what it means to serve, and he knows better than most what it means when that service is not honored the way it should be. When he stepped forward in lane 3 and told Ashley to ring everything up together, he was not doing it to be seen. There were no cameras rolling. There was no publicist managing the moment. There was no team of people around him waiting to turn this into a press release. There was just a man buying coffee who noticed another man struggling and decided to do the most natural, human thing available to him. He paid for the groceries. And then he made sure James did not have to feel like a charity case for accepting help. He reframed the whole thing. Your groceries are in front of my coffee. Simple, clean. Nobody owes anyone anything. It is just how checkout lines work. That reframing was as important as the money, because the worst part of needing help is often not the need itself. It is the way it can make you feel small. The way accepting help from a stranger can come with invisible strings of obligation and gratitude, and the uncomfortable awareness that someone is doing you a favor. Clint took all of that away. He made it nothing. He made it a Tuesday morning in a grocery store where 2 people happened to be in the same checkout line. That is a skill, and it is a harder skill than most people realize. Several customers had their phones out during parts of what happened. This is the world we live in. When something unexpected and moving happens in a public place, phones come out. It is not always out of disrespect. Sometimes it is the modern equivalent of wanting to remember something, to hold on to a moment that feels important. But here is what happened with those videos. Nobody posted them publicly. Not that day, not that week, not in the months that followed. People who had filmed pieces of the interaction shared it with family members, with close friends. They shared it the way you share something precious, carefully and personally, with people you trust to treat it the right way. They did not put it on social media because they understood, without having to discuss it, that doing so would take something that had happened with real dignity and turn it into content. It would make James Patterson, one who had stood at that register trying to protect his own dignity, into a viral moment. A thing to be watched and commented on and shared and eventually forgotten when the next viral moment came along. They chose his dignity over their own chance at a few thousand likes. That choice, the decision those people made to not post the video, is itself a form of the same kindness that started the whole thing. The story spread through Carmel anyway, the way stories spread in small towns, through conversation, through people telling people, through word of mouth moving from one neighbor to the next. It became part of the town's sense of itself. A story people shared when they wanted to remind each other what their community was capable of. 6 months after that Tuesday morning, James Patterson passed away in his sleep. He died quietly, out in his apartment, peacefully. He was not in pain. He was not alone in the broader sense, because by then he had people who checked on him regularly, people from the Safeway, people from his neighborhood who had heard the story and started paying attention to the elderly man who lived nearby. He was found the next morning by a neighbor who had gotten into the habit of noticing when his lights did not come on at the usual time. The funeral was small, the way funerals are for people who have outlived most of their generation, but it was not empty. More than 50 people attended. Several of them had been in the Safeway that morning 6 months earlier. Ashley was there. The woman who had given James the first $20 bill was there. A few of the regular customers who had stopped him in the aisles over the past months were there. James's nephew gave the eulogy. He talked about the man his uncle had been, the veteran, the quiet person who did not make a fuss, the man who had come home from Vietnam and built a life as best he could and asked for very little from anyone. And then he talked about the Safeway. Uncle James told me that day changed how he saw his final months, the nephew said. He had been feeling forgotten, like his service and his struggles did not matter to anyone, like he had lived his life and it had not left much of a mark. He paused, and then a store full of strangers reminded him that he mattered. He lived his last months differently because of that. He was less afraid, he was more hopeful, he was more connected to his community. He stopped feeling invisible. Several people at the funeral were crying. He used to say, the nephew continued, when that the hardest thing about getting old is the feeling that the world has moved on without you, that nobody remembers what you gave or what you went through. That day at the Safeway, all those people stopped and said, no, we see you. You matter. That was the greatest gift anyone could have given him at that point in his life. Clint heard about James's passing through a mutual acquaintance in Carmel. He sent flowers to the funeral. With the flowers came a small card, handwritten, simple. It read, "It was an honor to buy you coffee that day. Thank you for everything you gave to this country. Clint." The nephew kept the card. He framed it and hung it in his home, next to a photo of his uncle in his army uniform, young and strong, standing somewhere in Vietnam in 1969. 2 images, 50 years apart. Sonny, the same man at the beginning and near the end of a life that mattered more than he knew. The James Patterson Veterans Assistance Fund at that Safeway in Carmel is still active today. It does not advertise. It does not have a website. It does not send out press releases or hold fundraising events. It simply exists quietly behind the registers. When a veteran comes through the checkout and comes up short, an employee can access the fund. No paperwork, no questions about why or how or when they will pay it back. No requirement to feel grateful in any particular way. Just the quiet, simple act of making sure the total gets covered. Over the years since 2018, the fund has helped hundreds of veterans, hundreds of people who walked into that store carrying the weight of service and age and fixed incomes that do not always stretch far enough. Seen hundreds of people who might have had to put something back, who might have stood at a register counting coins with shaking hands. Instead, they got their groceries. They got to keep their dignity. They got to walk out of that store feeling like the community they live in gives a damn about them. All of that traces back to a Tuesday morning in September when a man in a baseball cap decided to step forward in a checkout line and make it simple. It is easy to tell this story as a story about Clint Eastwood. He is the famous name. He is the reason it got attention. Without him, James Patterson's moment at the register would have been just another small, quiet moment of struggle in a grocery store that nobody beyond the people present would ever know about. But that is not really what the story's about. Hear me. The story is about what happened after Clint paid. It is about the woman who gave James $20 because her father had been helped by a stranger once, and she was still carrying that forward decades later. It is about the businessman in the suit who handed over $50 without a speech or an explanation. It is about the bagger making minimum wage who reached into his own pocket and gave $10 because he had been standing 3 feet away, watching an old man be embarrassed, and he had decided he was not going to just stand there. It is about Ashley, who started the morning by sighing audibly at an old man counting coins and ended it by paying for a gift card out of her own money because something had changed in her during those few minutes. It is about every single ordinary person in that store who saw what was happening and chose to respond. Thus, Clint started it, but they continued it. and the continuation is what made it something real. One act of kindness by a famous person is a nice story. One act of kindness by a famous person that sparks a dozen more by completely ordinary people is something bigger. It is proof of something. It is proof that most people, given the chance, given a moment of permission, will choose kindness over indifference. We live in a world that sometimes makes it hard to believe that. We see the arguments and the cruelty and the way people treat each other online and in the news. It is easy to start thinking that the world is mostly made of hard edges and cold shoulders. And then something like this happens. An old man counts coins in a checkout lane. A man behind him steps forward. A woman behind that man reaches into her purse. And in 2 minutes, a grocery store becomes a community. James Patterson never thought of himself as someone whose life had made a big impact. He was a veteran who came home from a hard war and lived a quiet life and tried to get by. He was not famous. He was not powerful. He did not leave behind buildings with his name on them, or companies he had built, or awards he had won. He left behind $200 that strangers gave him on a Tuesday morning. He left behind the habit, formed in his final months, of connecting with his community instead of withdrawing from it. He left behind a fund that has quietly helped hundreds of veterans who came after him. He left behind a nephew who understood that an ordinary man's life had mattered deeply to the people around him, even when that man could not see it himself. And he left behind a story that, every time it is shared, does the same thing it did in that store on that morning. It stops people. It makes them look up from what they were doing. It reminds them that the person ahead of them in line might be carrying something they cannot see, and that the smallest decision to step forward and say, "I've got this," can change everything. You do not have to be Clint Eastwood to do what Clint did. You do not need to be famous. You do not need to be wealthy. You do not need a moment where a store full of people is watching. You just need to notice, and then decide to act. That is the whole lesson. That is all of it. We are all just trying to get through our days. Some days the money lines up, and the bills are paid, and the groceries fit in the budget. Some days you find yourself at a register, counting out the last of your coins, hoping it is enough. And on those hard days, the difference between despair and hope can be as small as one person stepping up and saying, "Ring it all up together." That is what real strength looks like. Not on a screen, not in a Western or a Hollywood film, in a grocery store checkout lane on a Tuesday morning in September. That is where it lives. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you have your own story of unexpected kindness, share it in the comments. Those stories matter more than you know.